Hello, my name is Meredith Kutz, the Professional Development Associate here at NACE. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, New Survey, Virtual Campus Recruiting, What's Working and What's Not. It is my pleasure to introduce Michael Magarian, Executive Vice President of Sales at Yello, and Dan Bartfield, co-founder at Yello. Take it away.
Great, thank you so much. Welcome to today's review of Yello's Virtual Campus Recruiting Survey, where, as you heard, we will be covering exactly what's working and what's not, based on feedback from more than 500 campus employers and 1,000 students. My background, I've actually been at Yello for 5 years, 20 years in the SaaS software industry with 11 focused on talent acquisition, and I'm joined by Dan Bartfield, Yello's co-founder. Dan actually has more than 20 years of campus recruiting experience. While Yello's been around for 12, you may also know us, we were previously called Rexaloo. Prior to Yello, Dan founded eCampus Recruiter, which was software that powered many of the campus career centers of the attendees here today, and was eventually sold to Simplicity. So today, there'll be a brief intro on Yello, and then we're gonna jump right into what you're all here to see, Yello's Virtual Campus Recruiting Benchmark Survey. We'll highlight the results and the key takeaways and provide a view into this coming fall season. So quickly, for those of you that are not familiar, hopefully it's very few at this point, Yello was founded 12 years ago, really focused on helping the world's largest companies with campus and diversity recruiting. We created the first mobile recruiting applications, and then over time expanded to help the world's largest employers manage the recruiting operations workflow, including everything from event-based scheduling and recruiting to video interviewing, CRM, and more. Yello helps companies find and hire the best quality candidates faster. We're a complete end-to-end talent acquisition platform built for early talent recruiters, and it also streamlines recruitment operations to create a better experience for students and staff. We're used globally in more than 70 countries at massive scale. And we empower the world's largest brands to build their talent pipelines, strengthen their school relationships, and analyze the ROI of their campus and diversity recruiting strategies. Lastly, we're agnostic, both ATS and school agnostic. We know that every recruiting team has different needs, and so we partner and work with every major applicant tracking system, and our solutions are flexible enough to work at any campus. We're not here to replace those tools or relationships. Rather, we're here to make it all work well together more smoothly. So with that, I'll turn it right over to Dan to walk us through the survey results.
Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're located. I'm really excited and thank you for attending today's virtual campus recruiting benchmark survey. As Mike said, my name is Dan Bartfield, co-founder of Yello. I've been in the business for 20 years. I hate saying that now, but it's true. I used to be one of the youngest people in the room. Now, when I walk into a room, I'm typically one of the oldest, which is not always the best thing here. Some of you may know this. We do a benchmark survey every year. This year, one was a little bit different because this is the first time that I've been alive during a pandemic. So we don't have a lot of data to compare from last year versus this year like we typically do with our benchmark survey. But let's take a quick look back. I mean, what a crazy year it has been. If we go back to February, we can all remember being sent home from work and then our kids being sent home from work or sent home from school. And then we're all staring at each other like, what's next? As the months went by, the shock wore off and we were able to get back to work. So it's really exciting for us to kind of go over the survey today. As Mike said, we talked to 500 campus recruiters, over 500 and over 1,000 students. And we asked questions, is virtual recruiting working? What tools are most effective? And where do recruiters need help? I will tell you this survey took place at the end of Q4, so it's fairly recent. But it is very recruiter heavy. So it's really good. It gave us an honest view for the career centers on the call today of what the recruiters are looking for. And the recruiters were very straightforward about where they need help and where things are thriving. There were some surprises in here as well, and some things that are just common sense as we go through this. I'm gonna go ahead and go to the next slide. Today, we're gonna share the top 7 action items and insights that you could take from the virtual survey. I kind of feel like we're on Family Feud here. We're gonna put the top 7 answers on the board and kind of go through this. But all this is based on our survey. While we're going through this, we're also going to give you best practices as well, which is really exciting. Go ahead and go next. All right. So of the 7, here's the first one. Okay. We asked recruiters, once again, I do feel like I'm a family recruiter. We asked recruiters, what are the most effective virtual strategies? As you see, they said video interviews, career fairs, virtual career fairs, and phone interviews. Then we asked students, what are your favorite ways to connect with employers? All right. Video interviews, phone interviews, and social media posts. So as you can see, both recruiters and candidate alike agree that video interviewing is the most important part of the process, or the most effective, or the best way they like to connect. Why do we think so? We believe, as we dug in, because we always asked additional questions beyond this, it was actually the closest thing to a real interview, right? A face-to-face interview, what we're used to, okay? So this made it for a lot of our people, less stressful, that they'd be able to actually get that connection. Because we know, and you're going to hear this over and over and through our research, the reasons why candidates actually go to a company, one of the number one reasons, it's not actually money, it's not actually location, it's actually the connection they have with the recruiter. Okay. So this gives a great example for recruiters to actually reinforce their brand, facilitate great relationships. So it gives them a way to, since you can't be there in person, it gives you a way to actually connect. Now, what we did hear is from the recruiters and the students, the process needs to be simple. Video interviewing needs to be simple. Students don't want to download another piece of software. Recruiters don't want to have to log into another piece of software. So it has to be simple and integrated as well. Go ahead and go to the next slide. We've also learned that people use this software, the video interview software, for a lot more than just video interviewing. So the capabilities are there. So what we see is that during the pandemic and because of social distancing, employers have gotten more creative. They're using virtual interviews almost in every stage of the process. So let's think about this. In the early stages, they're doing virtual coffee chats, pre-recorded interviews and candidate screening. In later stages, they're doing virtual group interviews, larger interview groups, and then they go back into the more formal interviews. So they're able to use this in order to connect more. So it's really important when you're looking at this and as you're going through this, go beyond just the normal formal interview. Okay, candidates want that connection, and our data is going to show this as we move forward, how much candidates want that one-on-one connection with the recruiters. But once again, we constantly hear, no matter what they're using, it has to be simple. It has to be integrated. The days of all the bells and whistles, nobody wants that from what our data says. They just want to be able to go into a system, click a link, and actually get that connection. Okay. Also, with this type of virtual video interviewing and all these different types of ways you can use it, reporting has become front and center. And it's not just recording the interviews, it's being actually able to track how many you had, how many were successful, talk about that candidate journey through the process, because now you're actually tracking all the touch points virtually. So now you have record of that in your system. Okay. We have a great client example. EY, or formerly known as Ernst & Young, did a webinar for us a couple months ago. And they were able to cut time to offer by 50% with virtual recruiting and video interviews. What they did is they switched to pre-recorded video interviews for screening candidates. And they discovered, this is actually a really big discovery, they discovered that most candidates actually take their pre-recorded videos after business hours. They actually also discovered that most of their partners and hiring managers did the same. So they were actually able to reach more and get through more because they weren't dictated to the normal business hours of a normal workday. So it is a great example of them reaching more candidates faster while improving the candidate experience. Now for career centers, we've heard this over and over again. And once again, I don't want you to shoot the messenger on these, but employers want to own their own system and their own experience. They appreciate for some of the smaller companies that you give them the option to use yours, but they really like to use their own for tracking, also so for simplicity as well. When you think about all the hiring managers that have to use their product, they don't want to have to jump into multiple systems. So a big takeaway for the career centers is we have to figure out ways they can use their own system and actually integrate it very quickly and seamlessly. Because What they also don't want to do is be cutting and pasting, because we've seen a lot of issues with cutting and pasting. Numbers get cut off, phone numbers get cut off. So for career centers, one of the big takeaways for you for this is how can they use their own system more effectively within your recruiting systems that you use at the colleges or universities. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay. So next thing for number 2, so number 1 was video interviewing. Number 2 is we asked recruiters, what are the most effective virtual strategies? Okay, so effective. And what we found out is that virtual career fairs were most widely used, but not always the most effective. Things like webinars and virtual intergroups were actually associated with better overall results. And we define results of the number of candidates that you have reached, the number of candidates that you actually go through the process and actually got hired. So as we think about this, this shouldn't be much of a surprise. And once again, through our data, and we're asking recruiters and students this, most of them do not like physical career fairs, and most of them don't really like virtual career fairs as well. With that said, we're not saying get rid of the career fair. It is a really important part of the process, but it shouldn't be the only part. Okay? So as you look at this and think about this, virtual career fairs are one of the top tools, but as we go further down, there's some opportunities to start leveraging these tools, other tools, to drive better results. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So according to recruiters, the tools that drive the most productive results are actually webinars, live streams, virtual group interviews, and video interviews. Okay, that was a little bit surprising to me, but as you think about it, and the way the process works is that candidates or students are very busy, recruiters are very busy. So to sit there and to go to each one of these different types of career fairs are time consuming. So if the recruiter owns their own process and actually does a webinar or a live stream where they can actually talk to multiple schools at once or multiple different types of candidates at once, we can actually see that webinars, they can go to all the different types of schools, actually talk to the students, then go into smaller groups, then go into smaller groups after that. Now, once again, this is what our data shows. This was done in Q4, and this is what our recruiters and students have told us. So don't be afraid to try new tools in addition to your virtual career fairs. And it also helps you track those results as well within your tool set. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So the third thing that we saw is that smaller companies actually used more webinar and video and were more successful at it. As we look at our data here, okay, we defined a smaller company as 500 to 1,000. They saw 68% saw more candidates. And if we look at larger companies of 10,000 above, 35% saw fewer candidates. So what we'd say is larger companies should take notes to some of the smaller companies. As campus recruiting went virtual, smaller companies were able to participate in ways that never been done before. So what it did, it actually leveled the playing field. So when you go to these large career fairs, you see these large enterprise companies with the bigger booths. There's a lot of traction there, long lines, and you typically see the smaller companies with not the bigger lines. What this does, this levels the playing field. It gave people more time to get to more of the smaller companies, and they were able to do that. So what we say is, when we look at this, let's go into more of the details, and let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So what we found is we dug into this a little bit further within our survey, and we found smaller companies were actually able to repurpose their recruiting budgets to adopt more innovative tools. What we saw from larger companies, and once again, this is what our data shows us, that a lot of their budgets got cut. And when they got cut, they were unable to move into some of these other types of tools. And they mainly relied on virtual career fairs. And what we see through our data, and this is what we see year after year, we know with smaller companies, they're easier to produce and talk about why the budget's more important, where the larger companies, sometimes these decisions are made above people's heads. And what we always say is that if you don't have presence on a campus, if you leave for 1 year, it takes 3 to 5 years to actually build that brand back on campus again. So it's really important. And we tell the larger companies to please follow the lead of the smaller companies. And remember that budget is very important. And this is always an investment as we move forward. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So this was a very surprising one to me as well. Do you need to acquire additional sources to reach students beyond your existing virtual recruiting efforts at partner universities? Okay. Over 50%, so over 58% said they needed to acquire new sources beyond what they did with their partner schools. So what's going on here? Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. What we found is that recruiters needed to focus on quality over quantity, especially when it comes to niche sets or a particular type of data. So what ended up happening here is, and this is not a secret to anyone, that the top career centers, and NACE puts out this survey every year, gets between 40 and 30% of the total school population actually going through their career centers. So if you're not going to campus and you're not actually doing those partnerships with the different departments or doing class projects or being creative on campus, everyone's going kind of from the same data pool. So what we found is that everyone was kind of pulling from the same data pool, which made it harder to find those top students. So what we saw is that a lot of our companies, or a lot of the data that we shows us, is that they had to go find unique niche sources of talent for diversity, high school, military. And for this year, this was the first year I really saw a lot of our companies, or a lot of the data shows that a lot of our companies were actually going down to the high school level. We've been seeing this trend for a couple of years now, but this is the year where we actually saw a lot of them really dive down and go into the high school. And we've even had some of our companies saying, don't go to college, we'll train you here, which was really interesting and completely new for me as being in this market for 20 years. So as you get more volume, we find more niche things, more things to actually work on. We constantly see, how do we find more targets, and how do we need to go to more, how do we get into more different types of schools, and virtual was able to help you that. This is not a commercial, but this is the whole reason why Yello built their sourcing marketplace. So we've partnered with Simplicity and Tallo and Hiring America to help you with that, because the number one thing we said is, yes, we can go find these niche market things, but how do we get them into our system? How do we get them into a seamless system so that it doesn't look like they have to go on more and more pieces with that? So that's why it's really important to work with a variety of different partners and to let us know. Career centers, if you would like to get your students in front of our 300+ customers, please let us know. Recruiters, if there's other partners you would like to see us integrate, please let us know as well. We would love to take advantage of that. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So 5. So next we'd asked is, what are the 3 most important factors to improve your virtual experience? Recruiters agreed that video and virtual events are key, but a big number of recruiters also pointed out to us that interview scheduling and personalized email campaigns are just as important. As you can see in the chart here, 1 in 3 recruiters said those tools are the top 3 factors to improve their virtual. So if we look at these things here, we look at communication, automated interview scheduling, basic CRM functions are really important. The most important thing that we constantly heard over and over again through our data is the actual personalization. So if you look at our chart here, it says marketing, email campaigns, and text campaigns. They're there, but what we found is that students actually want the personalization. They want to have more frequent one-on-one communications. To be honest with you, even though video interviewing was effective and they liked it, students like it to a point. What we heard in our student survey that went out recently was that people are getting what they're calling Zoom fatigue. So when we talk about video interviewing, everyone likes the first video interview, right? It helps them get their culture. The second one is good too. It's the third and fourth one where we're starting to see some trail off of, look, we're done with that. We want to have other things. So there's nothing wrong with picking up the phone. What we find also is they want big texts as well. What they don't really like is the email blasts or the text campaigns. When I say they, I mean the students. So these are just really important factors when we're thinking about being in the virtual environment. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So when we're thinking about how we're doing this is why it's really important to have those foundational tools like interview scheduling, CRM, email campaigns. When we talk about email campaigns, it's the individual email campaigns, text campaigns, okay? Because when we look at these things, when we have these foundational tools, what this does, this gets the recruiters back to recruiting and getting out of the admin work. So with frequent one-on-one communications, it actually builds that personal relationship, which is really hard to get from virtual, right? Because we know, I said this in the beginning, our data constantly shows that the reason why students or candidates pick where they go to work is because of the recruiter relationship. Okay. It also helps, the automation also helps with time to hire. So automating that, this is common, automating that you can get there, as well as it's really important to start always building your brand on campus and tracking every touch point. Branding is probably one of the things that we're seeing more and more of our customers go to, which is great. And it's really important because you have to get to them early as well. Okay. We had a great example from our client BDO, who did another webinar for us when this all started, because like I said, this trend of virtual has been happening for a while. This kind of kickstarted it into place, where they use Yello for virtual and in-person campus recruiting. And when they did this, they were able to reduce their coordination time by 2 to 3 days just because of self-candidate scheduling. In career centers, this goes back to the thing where a lot of our clients and a lot of the data we show says that the employer still wants to control a lot of this. So for the employers, if you're doing your own interviewing, it's really important to get that data back to the career centers as well. So the partnership there has to stay strong. So you guys can collaborate and get the data back and forth. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay. So number 6 is students need help building recruiter relationship. Right? The majority of students say the pandemic and virtual recruiting made it harder to find a job and build relationships with recruiters. As you can see in the chart, nearly 2 in 3 students say it was harder to find a job. Almost 60% said it's harder to build a recruiter relationship. This shouldn't be surprising. The pandemic kind of hit us, and a lot of companies were just not ready for it, and a lot of the world was not ready for it. Let's be realistic about it. And students are very stressed out, and we're going to show you some data on that in a minute. But once again, they find it harder being virtual because they're losing that culture touch of what is that company about? And also what we're finding is that if the recruiter or the career center are not having that one-on-one relationship with the candidates, and I know it's hard because you're going through a lot, so they're finding it hard to actually find that relationship and find where they want to go. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So students are less concerned with technology, to be honest with you, and they're more concerned about how do I get that one-on-one access with the recruiter? Because the old touch points would be the career fair, right? Old touch points would be class presentations, class projects, info sessions, getting out there and having those one-on-one conversations. And what we really heard over and over again is that students want real access, not chatbot, not so much chat on a website. Text messaging is considered real access to them. Phone calls is considering real access, and one-on-one is considered real access to them. So whether physically or virtually, it's really important to have that one-on-one access to each other. Okay, go ahead and go to the next slide. 7. All right, so the 7th action item, put the student experience front and center. This should not be a surprise to anyone on this call. Student experience is always one of the most important things that we hear about. But compared to in-person recruiting at your campus, virtual recruiting is, and this is what we heard, 48% said more stressful or above. 27% said about the same. Just 1 in 5 said less stressful. So overall, students think this is a very stressful time, and it's very stressful for the recruiters as well. So we have to think of ways of how we can make this less stressful. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay. And you can win over the students by trying to make it as less stressful as possible. So some of the things, there's some recommendations that our recruiters made is what worked for them is to be clear, personalized communication, in-depth details about the position, as well as be patient, can help reduce stress in many different ways. This goes also for the recruiters as well, right? So it's important for the career centers to relay these messages to the students and the candidates as well, because we're all stressed, but it's how do we make sure that we're going through this? A lot of it has to do with technology. A lot of it has to do with personalization and personal touch. It's going that extra step and truly understanding what the candidate's going through, as well as what the recruiter's going through. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So here's some advice to recruiters from students. These are always open-ended questions. Some of them are pretty much common sense. Other ones are a little bit surprising, but understand the student schedules. Please remember that we are new to this just as you are. So when we think about this and understand the student schedules, there are a lot of different Zoom meetings. I've been told there's a lot more meetings happening now, actually, because everything's virtual. It's not that I have to go to a classroom, I have to do this. So their schedules, student schedules, from what we've been told, are actually being a lot more and asking for a lot more. Everyone needs to be understanding. We're all going through this. Make the events more interactive. It's more than just a chat. It's more than just waiting in line, right? What other things can we do? What other videos can we show them? What other things can we get in front of them for them to understand our culture, because everything is done virtually now. They love social media. It's very helpful for them, is what we've heard over and over again. Okay. Try to create personal emails to get their attention. The email blasts are no longer working. The massive text campaigns are no longer working. Okay. A big thing is connect with clubs on campus. Find other ways to reach us. Some of the smaller schools, it's harder to get to the Career Center. They don't have the access some of the larger schools do. Okay. And be accommodating. And we know this, once again, a lot of this is common sense, but it's good just to hear it as well. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, so sum it up as action items to improve virtual results and student experience. The biggest thing is create an amazing video experience. Understand what that means. Understand that it has to be simple. And understand is how many video interviews do you actually need in order to make a decision. Okay. Think beyond the virtual career fair, right? There's other ways to reach students, either through webinars, live streams, other ways to connect with them through classrooms, class projects. Just think about that. But we're never saying get rid of the career fair. The career fair actually is value there, but there's other ways to get to these students as well in order to help your brand and make sure that that works. Smaller companies, we keep seeing this. Smaller companies were a little bit more nimble. They were able to reuse budget in other places. While we saw larger companies across the board start slashing budgets, and they were able to try new technologies and get in front of more students. Okay. Expand your sourcing options. Always look for different places to go. Find unique sourcing options. We know with diversity is really important, and we know a lot of companies fill their diversity pipeline through early talent. So think about different ways you can do that in order to expand those sources. Take full advantage of your technology. A lot of you have different pieces of technology. Think of unique ways of using your technology. Understanding your technology is there to help. It's not going to replace the one-on-one connection, but it can help you automate some of these basic things. Well, it gives you more time to actually build that relationship, which falls into the relationship. Relationship is key. It's always been key in virtual and physical. And it's really important that you keep that up. I know a lot of you are working with less people. So we find ways to use technology to get the admin work off you, so you can constantly build those relationships, because that's what the students are looking for. And finally, put the student experience front and center. Understand the importance of the student experience. And understand that you're always on, you're always looking, students are always looking, and they want to make sure that they're actually understanding what's happening. So student experience is really important. And there's some unique ways to do that through technology. And once again, it's what makes decision about that. So student experience doesn't have to cost money. It could be a one-on-one relationship. It could be, hey, I'm reaching out to see how you're doing. It doesn't always have to be a job selling opportunity. It's just, I'm here to help if you need it. Go ahead and go to the next slide. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Mike to talk about what the fall season looks like.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, so the big question is, what will the fall campus season look like this year? And it's clear that virtual campus recruiting is here to stay. I'm on the next slide here. Even after in-person physical events do resume. And we've learned that the majority of recruiters, nearly 2 out of 3, plan to leverage a mix of both virtual and in-person, even post-pandemic, once we're back without a pandemic, and even more plan to recruit virtually this fall. The most successful campus recruiting teams will leverage a combination of both in-person and virtual strategies moving forward. And early talent needs are definitely not going away. We saw this strategy 2 years before COVID. We started to see companies we work with begin to move to virtual campus recruiting strategies to supplement their on-campus presence while saving time and significantly reducing the cost to recruit. The pandemic has now accelerated that change, and now every company will make extensive use of both virtual and physical. The recruiting funnel that companies use to hire early talent remains the same, but the tactics and the tools are a little different, and we'll dive into those in a second. So what does that look like in practice? We expect employers to return to campus at their core schools while expanding their reach virtually at their non-core schools. And for career centers, this means thinking outside the box about employer engagement. You can think more about virtual options to engage employers that may not be able to invest as much in attending your school physically on campus. Okay, so what does a combined virtual and in-person recruiting process look like? This process here was adapted from a few of our clients like Kearney, BDO, and EY, who really led the way in virtual campus recruitment. They made the switch years ago prior to COVID, and they've been a great resource to other recruiting teams. And if you're interested in hearing directly from them, we have a few websites and webinars and case studies featured on our website, so feel free to check those out. So as I just mentioned, the process and the recruiting funnel is similar in the physical in-person world, but the tactics are different. And every employer is different. So what does your ideal scenario and flow look like? Does the team put a higher priority on general info sessions, individual one-on-one conversations, or both? And at Yello, we have hundreds of customers who all have slightly different processes and strategies. And so this is a baseline, but employers make sure the process and the tools that you use are configurable to meet your needs. So we'll dive into the 4 stages, and I'd like to turn your attention to the virtual components up at the top, as most of us are already well accustomed to the traditional on-campus methods that we've all been doing for years. So we'll start with source your students through virtual events, partner with the campus career centers to distribute pre-registration links and capture resumes before your events. Send email campaigns to build your brand virtually with targeted candidate engagement. As you engage, host webinar-style events to create an engaging digital experience with candidates, and engage students with virtual events like your traditional info sessions and alumni presentations. Then use candidate engagement tools to nurture students to apply, and candidate evaluation tools to track those virtual touch points and identify your top candidates. Once identified, you can invite students to schedule time to connect via video interview tools, which work for informal conversations like coffee chats, as well as more formal screening interviews. Both live and pre-recorded can be used. Evaluate. Once you've interacted with students virtually or at events or one-on-one conversations, you can use candidate evaluations to track those interactions and collect feedback from staff. Be sure to automate reminders to staff and automate follow-up engagements and next steps for candidates, ensuring you reduce the manual work and create a smooth process for everyone. Finally, interview. Kick off the interview phase with virtual events like interview prep sessions to make sure candidates are prepared. Then invite candidates to self-schedule for a formal interview for a time that works best for them, along with automated confirmations and reminders leading up to that interview. Conduct your interviews via video, either one-on-one with hiring managers or more involved final round interviews. Throughout the interview process, you can track the candidate conversations, all in a shared candidate profile in a CRM, and identify top candidates with a streamlined candidate evaluation process that quickly collects feedback from all interviewers. Based on results from the Yello clients who use a variation of this process, we believe that supplementing your on-campus strategy with virtual will help you meet more candidates, diversify your talent pool, and hire faster, all while cutting costs and boosting your ROI of your program. So what tools will employers need to succeed in this modern virtual and in-person physical recruiting process? Recruiters will need tools for in-person and virtual. And some of the tools that will help you accomplish, we saw in the last slide. But for in-person, you'll really continue to need event management, event registration, event check-in and follow-up. And for virtual, you'll need some of the newer tools we spoke of: virtual events and webinars, live video interviews, pre-recorded video interviews, and eval management. And don't forget the recruiting essentials like interview scheduling, recruitment CRM, job boards, and talent communities. As we saw in the survey, recruiters say these are just as important as ever before. And as a best practice, make sure that all of your various tools sync and talk together. It'll be more efficient and effective for everyone. So what can you do to prepare for the fall? A few recommendations here. Audit your tools and processes. Think back to what worked and what didn't work for you the past fall season. What were the pain points in your process? Were there parts that were more difficult than they should have been? Start by investing or solutioning for those areas first. And they can be small too. For example, maybe it's something as simple as making sure recruiters don't have to copy and paste Zoom or webinar info into each email, something your team's doing thousands of times. Also, are you taking full advantage of your tech that's available? There's a lot of new tools out there that can help you adjust to the new normal. Test these out and make sure they can support your individual processes. Rethink your sourcing strategy. As we mentioned, recruiters are overwhelmingly said that they need support reaching specific candidates. Think back to the fall. Did you have trouble meeting certain candidates or filling specific roles? Take note of that. Brainstorm where you can meet those candidates virtually. Maybe it's non-core schools to your current program. Maybe it's student organizations on campus, industry organizations, referrals, etc. Talk to students and recruiters. Talk to people who went through your virtual process in the fall, both on the recruiter and the student side, to identify any pain points you may be blind to. If you hired interns or entry-level talent in the fall, set up a group with a meeting to debrief on what they liked and did not like about your process. Be sure to ask for solutions, not just problems. They've also had interactions with many other employers, and those could serve as a guide for you. And look at the data. As we saw in the survey data, what recruiters and students often think isn't always true according to the data. Before making any changes to your strategy, be sure to validate your thinking by crunching the numbers from the fall. For example, if a series of webinars had low attendance last spring, but had the best conversion of applicants and hires, you probably want to keep doing that in this environment. So to wrap up, as we mentioned before, all the data and insights we've talked about today from Yello's Virtual Campus Recruiting Benchmark Report will be available via these links here. There's also quite a few other data points in the surveys that we did not have time to cover today. So a link will be available via this website. And with that, we can open up the Q&A.
Yeah, we're going to request that any questions come through Q&A. There's a lot going on in chat, so it's just easier to go through the Q&A section. So if you would like to cut and paste or ask any questions, go ahead and put it in the Q&A. Anything we don't get to, we will email you on the side or make it available, somehow get to you with the answer. First question is, how many employers were surveyed in this? There were over 500 employers surveyed. We actually got to more than 500, but we just focused on the campus recruiters. So obviously as this went out, other recruiters took it, but we focused mainly on the campus recruiters. I'm going to get to the next question here. Do students and employers consider this the individual interviews that can happen within a career fair? So the question was, when we talk about video interviewing, do we consider the ones that happen during career fair in there, or we're specifically talking about the hiring process? The way we approached the question, it was mainly about the hiring process. So we know there's small one-on-one type interviews happening during a career fair. We did not drill into that. We focused mainly on the hiring process. So when we asked, it was interviews versus career fair, not were you doing interviews in career fair. What is a virtual group interview? What we saw here is that in order to, some of our clients or some of what we saw is that they're seeing a lot more people coming through their funnel. So they couldn't just do one-on-one interviews, but they still wanted to be able to connect. So a virtual group interview is where you have 3 or 4 people and it's more of a panel, right? You're not asking individual questions. It's a way for the candidates to ask you information. So it's more of an info session. where they can ask you questions and you can kind of relate to them and get a feel of who they are.
What is CRM?
Mike, do you want to go ahead and answer that? I can.
CRM's a candidate relationship database where you're able to engage both with the candidates that you meet through all the various places that you meet and engage candidates, but also internally, your team's able to engage and collaborate and see everything in one central place and take action on those candidates right from that solution.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So it's
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was going to add a little bit more to that. So it's the way companies use it is that they meet first years and second years and high school students, and they need a place to put them because they're not ready for a job and they're not ready for their ATS yet, right? Because they're not ready to apply to anything, but they want to be able to market to them. They want to be able to reach them. They want to be able to tell them what their company is doing for the world and what they're doing on their campus. So it's just a great way to kind of way to keep these candidates warm. Because when we think about recruiting, it's very similar to marketing, right? So think about when you get marketed to, it's the same type of process.
Thank you. Can you define virtual group interviews, and do students and employers consider these individual interviews that can happen within a career fair, or are they talking specifically about the hiring process?
They're talking specifically about the hiring process. So we didn't drill down into that. And we talk about virtual group interviews. It's when you interview more than one person. So it's not really an interview. It's where you get 3 or 4 students with one recruiter or one hiring manager, where the students can ask questions. So instead of doing those one-on-ones, you're still getting a personal touch because you're not in a group of 1,000, but it's broken down to smaller groups and you can get through more people that way or more candidates that way. And then you can drill down to the next steps after that.
Were there any specific virtual career fair platforms mentioned, like Candidate Friendly, vFairs, Brazen, Astound?
There were not. We kept it as a whole. We did break it down from the Career Center, I think, versus those outside systems. So the Career Center software versus those, but we did not ask individual ones about those.
Thank you. What types of video interviews are best for different points in the process?
Great question. So when we think about video interviewing, there's different types through the different process. So what we've seen the most successful is that you do a webinar or a large live stream where you can give that information out. After that, it gets broken down into pre-recorded. Candidates and specifically your hiring managers love pre-recorded because once again, they can do it at their own time. It's in a calmer, less stressful environment. It's not being direct. A lot of different types of software lets you answer the question, gives you 3 times to answer the question. So you can really think about your answer. It also gives them more time for the screening to understand. Then after that, we typically will see a coffee chat or a one-on-one. And then after that, we'll see a formal interview.
What's the best way to drive student attendance to employer-hosted virtual events?
Mike, you want to take that one?
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of pre-event marketing via email campaigns, leveraging the relationships that the employers already have on campus, and hosting info sessions to drive further activity in that recruiting process.
Would you be so kind enough to share the bit.ly links to the surveys? Can you post those survey links again? Yes, thank you. And
we'll also, there'll be a follow-up email which has the full survey. I'm seeing some questions in the chat where some folks are looking for more information on some of the student info. So again, there was quite a bit of additional content. We only showed a portion of the survey, so please download the link and view the rest.
Which had strong results, virtual career fairs or individual events?
I don't have that answer. I have a guess, but I don't actually have the raw data on that one.
Thank you. Can you put the address up again where we can review the survey results? Is that up there?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. We allowed our employers to use any platform, but with that, it made more sense for them to actually schedule their own interviews. So easier for all, but leaves the Career Center a little out of the loop. Thoughts on that?
Very much so. And that's part of why it has to be a partnership. So what we've seen for successful ones is that if that's great, we want you to do that, we want you to own it, but we need the information back. And that needs to be set up from the beginning. And it needs to be very upfront on that because all these softwares, specifically Yello, very easy to get a download of that to get that to you very quickly. So it's one of those things that has to be set up front. But once again, it's because it's a partnership, right? And they need to understand, the recruiters understand or should understand how the Career Center gets revenue and how it's generated. And part of it is placement for some of you. So that's why it's important to get that information back.
Thank you. What are some recommended resources for locating a centralized list of employer webinars and live stream sessions geared toward university students seeking internships and full-time employment?
I'm going to have to get back to you on that one.
Okay. Thank you.
There's different lists out there. There's different places out there. Let's pull those together. Maybe we'll do a best practice on that on our website.
Thank you.
Yep. They also, a lot of the employers host those on their sites. And, we've seen a lot of feedback where they want to be able to post those on the Career Center sites as well.
Thank you. What social media platforms do they prefer most and use most frequently?
We see LinkedIn being used. We see Instagram being used. We've seen some successful, if you can get approved with Snapchat, but you got to be careful with that one as well. When we start, because candidates or students at this age just want quick blasts. So we're seeing those types of software being used today. But companies that are successful, they have a software that integrates with that, so that it's very easy to post and push out.
Thank you. Can you share more about what happens in the live stream events you have mentioned?
Yeah. So one of the questions is what's the difference between live stream and webinar? Those we probably should have done what do those mean? Live stream is basically, it's a live event. So think about it as a live event where you invite thousands of candidates, very similar to what we're doing here, and you show videos, you have different people in your organization speak about your culture, you can answer questions about the process, and you can do that. So that's live. We've also seen them where they're actually recorded beforehand and they just push them out. And if you're interested in learning more after the end of the video, they click a link and then they can go ahead and submit their resume and register to get more information. But a lot of it, the live is all about culture. It's all about getting that personalization, that one-on-one of what we do at this organization, which is sometimes really hard to get in a virtual world. So we're seeing companies have CEO speak. So massive Fortune 500 or even 200 companies, their CEOs are coming out and speaking during these because they understand the value of early talent. We're seeing polls being used. We're seeing some gamification being used. We're seeing some of our clients even use assessments during the process, but they don't realize they're being assessed because it's part of their gaming. They want to keep them engaged and make sure their participation is up as well.
Thank you. What have you found, Arton? What are you hearing from students regarding ways to make the virtual sessions more interactive? Yeah,
it's a lot of it is they like the large group to start with, is what we hear. And that's fine, but they want to be polled. They want to be able to ask questions and they want to get real responses. There's been a push for some chatbot responses and those have always not worked well from what we've seen through our data. And if you download the rest of the data, you'll see some of that. But it's how do we keep them engaged through polling? How do we keep them engaged in content that relates to them? So if you're doing one for the Big Ten, let's talk about the Big Ten and what you've done for them. Maybe bring up some things about football or basketball. Once again, it's about being engaged, personalizing it, even though it's in a large group.
What types of information data can career centers advocate for employers to share return with after hosting their own events? What is most useful, easiest to get?
All right, I'm going to let you into a little bit of a secret here. They can get every bit of information. So it's who attended, questions asked, engagement level, where they are, where they move to the next steps. So after that, a lot of it is the next steps and a lot of it is eventually to hire, right? So how do I get all that information so I can relay it back? So it's what information do you do, but typically it's who attended. It's typically who's moving on to the next step, how many interviews, and then to hire.
Thank you. How have budgets impacted recruitment? What is the outlook for 2021?
Yeah, so Yello, we typically work with large enterprise organizations, and we have seen, even though a lot of them are hiring the same amount, to be honest, which was a surprise to me, we are seeing budgets being cut and asking to do more with less. And that's why technology is so important to make that investment. Because once again, the goal would be for technology is not to replace the recruiter. That is the absolute wrong thing to do. The goal of technology is to make the recruiter's job easier, get rid of administration work. So once again, they can just focus on the candidate and focus on building the relationships. So some of our clients, it's a struggle because they don't value early talent, while others see early talent, like are typically the ones that are in accounting, understand the focus of early talent, and it's not as hard. But once again, it's something where you have to build a business case on it, because a lot of times you have to do that, and we've helped customers or clients with that as well.
I would add there's also an industry element to that right now as a result of the pandemic. Some industries have been impacted a lot more than others, and so we see the organizations that have not been impacted as much, doing as much hiring or even more in some cases.
Are employers open to expanding sourcing to new schools? Is it harder to attract new employers right now when there is definitely the need to generate more options for students?
No, actually, it's when we see it's not. As Mike mentioned this, we've seen this trend for the last 2 years. The pandemic just kicked it up a notch. We're seeing our clients, and this is through our data, we're very data organized group at Yello, is that we're seeing our clients going to less schools physically, but the schools they go to, they're spending more time, but they want to have a bigger reach. So if they're going to less schools, they need a better way to find these candidates. And that's why virtual was important, in the fact that now they can actually go to more schools without paying all that money to be on campus. What I mean paying is actually flying there, driving there, going there. So the budgets have opened up where they can actually focus on other places. They also like the fact of virtual because they can get the niche, right? So one positive I heard about virtual career fairs this year was that there was a lot more, which was not always positive, but the ones they went to were more focused. Virtual is here to stay. What we've seen is there's going to be an utter mix between virtual and physical. And once again, you're going to spend more time, what we've seen at your core schools, more money, more time there, but you're going to want to spread out and find students from other regions and other locations. And virtual gives you that ability because it's not a huge cost to do that.
From your research, do you think the in-person career fair will return post-pandemic, or is the virtual fair here to stay? I answer that.
No, it will return. I believe virtual career fair, if you claim it's working or not working, it depends whose data you're looking at. But at the end of the day, everyone's doing it. So that's why it's there. Look, the career center, the career fair should always be a stop for every single recruiter, right? You pick your core schools, those are the ones you go to because you need to do that. But there's also many options out there as well to help you make your database bigger, and so you can find different candidates across different platforms and different places.
Thank you. Any demographics metric regarding the students surveyed?
We actually do, and it's going to be in our student experience survey. So that's the one on the right-hand side of your screen. If you download that, you'll see the metrics there.
Thank you. What's the best strategy to get feedback from all student attendees from virtual career fairs?
There's many different ways to do that, different survey tools. We've also seen giveaways. We've seen gamifications. There's different ways to get that information. I've had clients hire third-party companies to actually physically text or call the students to get that information. So about how it went. But if you're looking to see how for each individual organization, how they did with those candidates, I would reach out to those organizations. One thing that I found out about my 20 years in this industry is that this group loves to talk and loves to share. So there's a lot there. Yello is actually coming out with a lot more benchmarking data as our clients allow us to, how they compete at individual schools, how they compete in individual regions. What does that mean? So there's more data coming out from us as we really, as I mentioned before, Yello is very focused on the data.
You just mentioned gamification. Can you briefly speak about that?
Yeah, so gamification for recruiters is we're seeing a lot of that in the industry now, and we're actually coming out with some pieces as well. It's How many candidates did you talk to? But actually put a leaderboard on there. How many of your candidates actually got hired? Or how many candidates got through the process? How many interviews scheduled? How many effective, how many of the right students did you meet? So looking at those types of pieces. When we do gamification for students on the live webinars, when you're asking polls, how many questions did you get right? How many questions did they answer? So looking at different ways to keep it interactive and making sure that everyone keeps engaged during the process.
Thank you. When you say that students don't like e-blasts, but email and text campaigns are effective, what's the difference? They realize that all these campaigns are mass, even if they're not personalized, but can you go into more detail about this?
Yeah, so not all are mass, actually. A lot of them through our systems are not. So the initial ones could be, but once you start building that relationship with the candidate and their friends are in the same grouping as they are, and they're both applying the same job or same area, and they both get the same text or the same email, it doesn't feel special. So what we recommend is that when you start whittling down your grouping and you're getting to the candidates that you want to start bringing into your final rounds, is you start focusing on more personalization and building that relationship with them. So when we say email blasts, I mean, we understand why they need to be there. But at the same time, we still understand that you can get personal. There's a lot of technology and tools out there that you can send individual text messages. It was nice meeting you yesterday, or we had a great interview, let me prep you for your next interview type thing. So there's ways to get that information there to be more personal.
We have one final question for the group. How has virtual recruiting impacted diversity recruiting efforts?
Yeah, it's a great question. Anecdotally, what we're seeing is that it's making it a little bit easier for our recruiters because once again, they can really drill down into the data they're looking for and really focus on the different populations through these niche sources of data. So instead of going to a diversity conference that not really happening, or going to individual schools and hoping that you'll hit your data, hoping you hit your numbers for diversity, you can actually drill down and understand which types of schools you're going to, as well as you can see which clubs they're involved in and different pieces like that in order to help you make your decisions and fill your diversity pipelines.
As well as expanding your total reach by attending more schools and participating in more schools virtually, because you have limited resources to attend physically in some cases. All right, great. Thank you so much. With that, we will turn it back over to Nace to close out this session.
Thank you, Dan Bartfield and Michael Garian, for a very informative session. And thank you, participants, for attending today's webinar. The archive, along with step-by-step instructions on how to receive these items, will be made available within 3 to 5 business days. Please note that the PowerPoint presentation will be made available following today's webinar. We would like to thank you for attending today's session. This officially concludes the webinar, and you may now sign off.